Kislev to Zayin. So the Rebbe brings the this chelik HaBiyurim shebechsidus adal cholkei paradis shemeranik Shiurim zeh b'zeh. But all the Biyurim, the Chassidus is mevayer to get to the Rebbe brings 4 Biyurim in Meidani. Pshat Rem is Drusayt, and the Beirus and the Chayes Chassidus brings in all the Pirushim. Now the Rebbe brings this mevayer that all the Biyurim of Chassidus and Meidani are connected one to another. Shiurim zeh b'zeh. Zok tazeh. HaKontress ha'odam she'achidush yishma'ayin. The Rebbe starts off with the beard of Seid. What's the beard from Seid? What's the pshat that this habos, the Achzaras and Sham Babeker, which is in Kuntres Havas Yishma'ayin, that comes from Malchus, the way from Yuchud to Seid. So the Rebbe brings it. HaKontress ha'odam she'achidush yishma'ayin bo hu me'atzm Seid in Sof. Shalom Alemus. What's the Nukud the Rebbe's inquired before? That what's the Nukud that there's that the Havas is from Malchus, the way from Yuchud to Seid. In order to be Mahavi Yeshma'ayin is not enough to have a makir. Since the makir has to be mushtas from the Gedarim of Metzias Legamri. Because we're making from an Einei Yeshnei, so in order to make from an Einei Yeshnei, if an Onkem and Sal makir, which is Legamri, not in the Gedarim of Ayin V'yesh. So all the dargas of Seder Shlashalos, even the Madam of Seder Shlashalos, each darg in Elokos there is already within the category of Metzias. It has what its Inyan is. So it has already what's which according to its darga, what's considered a mitzvah, what's not considered a mitzvah. The gabe bligvul, so let's say gvul, by definition is considered an ayin, and he can't change those gvul. If the gabe bligvul, a gvul is bottle, so he can't make from an eine is a varna yeshna. He's alone mukdin and gidra mitzvah. And every darga has his definition of what's the criteria, what makes something a mitzvah, what makes something not a mitzvah. Mash'ink in atzmos, which is not mukdin the gedarim of mitzvahs. Dafke nor atzmos in itself can macha for na eine machna yeshna. Since he's not defined in any definitions, he's not within the agdaris of any criteria of being, and he's also not mugdin the gather of ayin. So dafkim mitzad atzmos can zayin for na eine machna yeshna. So the Rebbe says this: once a person, this hakara that a person has, the chilish yeshma ayin comes from atzmos seidin sof, which atzmos seidin sof is the ganzen shleiva shlemayla meilimis, which that's the chilik haseid shemedan. So that is mechazik da hakara shkol eilimis mechazik mitamid ma'ayin be'efas hamuchlut. What's the nekuda of the beard of Chassidus? In the chelik haremes of Meidani is that as a mensch wächst sich the free, it's merames and tchias hamesim. So Chassidus is mevayer that a person waking up in the morning is really the nekuda of his havas yishmayim. So the Rebbe says here that the akara that the inyan of his havas is neveim and said asmim said itself. That's mechazik the akara that his havas is ma'ayin that is ma'ayin liyesh mamish. Mechazek is akara shkolim is mechazim tov ma'ayin b'yavas hamuchlut. What's the beard of chelik haremes? The beard of chelik haremes is that a person wakes up in the morning. Why does he see within waking up in the morning that it's havas yishmayim? Because be'etzem it's mufrech that he should exist. Be'etzem it's a chiddush that he's a mitzvah. Be'etzem he shouldn't have existed. Be'etzem is ayin b'yavas hamuchlut. The fact that he exists is a chiddush. So if that's the pashas of the minute he sees his weakness, in his weakness he sees that it's a bitur of the fact that he's an ayin. And the fact that he wakes up and becomes a B'rei Chadasha, that's the Novus Habas Yishmayim. That's the Rebbe's Mevarim before. So the Rebbe says here that through the Hakara in the beer and Chassidus and Chelik Hasod is mechazik the Hakara that this Habas is Yeshmayim Mamish. That's what the Rebbe does. So the Shad is what's became a Zagan. The whole how do you know where do we get to that? Where do you get to? Or what's the hechra that Habas is Ukei Chatzmos, which is in Mukde Bagdorim the Ayin V'yesh? Because this Havas is Miyesh Ma'ayin. If this Havas is not B'derech Yesh Ma'ayin, if before this Havas there was the Achshara for the Nivra to beer, so there's no Hechrich that we need to have the Keich of Atzim, so there's not Mugdar and Gdarim of Yesh Ma'ayin. The whole Hechrich that we need, that in order to have this Havas, we have an onkom to Keich Atzim, which is not Mugdar and the Gdarim of Yesh Ma'ayin, is because this Havas is Yesh Ma'ayin. Since the Nivra Mitzad Atzim is not a Mitzias, so Ayin Vevas HaMuchlet, so to transform from something which is not a Mitzias, to make it a Mitzias, it's only mitzad etzem, which is not mugdar the gdarim of mitzias. But here the Rebbe is saying that once a person has that akara in the fact that the Yishmayim comes from atzmos, that's mechazik that akara that this havas is Yishmayim mamish. That's what it's meaning mazber. Kibeim, it's like this. Kibeim, where is it? Kibeim ha'ishavos, ishavos ha'elumis, ha'isa. That's the kasha in the order. We'll see that in a minute. Ki be'im is havas ha'elam is ha'isad experience of alas mitzad asma. Mikiven she'elam is teifs u'makam legaba lehoye is eschachas v'chol ikra mitziyusu. אבל מכיוון שהסבא שם עצמם סיידן סוף ברוך הוא, שאין אלא סיידן סמקם לגבי כלל, הרי אין שום סמקם לכל עניונה, וכל עיקר מציוסים שחדש עצמם מאיר סוף ברוך הוא. That is saying a different word. What we're saying the whole time is that Yesh, that the nivra mitzad atzmai is ayin v'efes hamuklu. See, the regular dugma HaChassidus, when they get to Yesh ma'ayin, is from the Toras says in Tanya that Mishavas is b'chol rega v'rega. So it says, what was you say that Toras of the Kaifrim that they understood that you don't need to have a skarega. Like a person makes a kli. That after he finishes making the kli, there's no need for him to continue. The kli is not dependent on him after he finishes making it. Once he finishes making it, is the uman is heidech leveshuk, and the kli is b'dmusek etzam. So there's no dimin there. Before you make the kli, when you have the chtichas kesef, you have the afsharius to have the kli. There's already the alulis. The chaymer has the possibility. Has the to be a kli, to be a kais, to be a kli, whatever Sheva kli you're making. Mashik b'shemayim yesh ma'ayin. So it's the nivra mitzad atzmi is an ayin v'efes hamuchlet. The Torat brings it's even shalei be'erech a bigger pele than the fact that the yam stood k'chayim. Water mitzad tivay could flow, can't stand firmly. Pele v'kreis yam said the water stood firmly. So that's a chiddush. Heipach teva mayim. The male is a little pashat, and the minute the ruach stopped keeping the water up like a wall, and the water went back to the way it was mitzad its own teva, the minute the ruach stopped, the water started flowing again. So Toras says Allah has come with the nivra that it's heipach hatev for an ayin ve'efes to exist is heipach hatev. As is like that. So yesh ma'ayin is shalei be'erech a bigger pel and heipach hatev than kriyas yamsuf. And yadena versteht that a water mitzad atzmi is tiva is to flow, and the rega the chiddush is going to stop. The mayim would be chayzin b'meiret kedarkim tiva. Malachas come to get yesh mayim, and you see the Chassidus brings the mashal of Zrika 7. That's all. You see the stone mitzad atzmi can't fly, has a teva kevi that can't fly, and the fact that the stone is flying is because the person is throwing it. So we're saying yesh ma'ayin legabe the nivra. The nivra mitzad himself doesn't possess the ability to exist. The other things, or lakus, contains within himself the tchuna of kiyum, the tchuna of existence. Mashega the nivra doesn't contain within himself the tchuna of kiyum. It's an ayin v'efes. The dugmas like the Evan doesn't contain within himself the ability to fly. And the only reason why it's flying is because the keich hayad is throwing the Evan, and the minute the keich hayad stops, the Evan falls down on the floor again because mitzad atzmi can't fly. So Al Toras when you get this house Yishma'ayin that the nivra mitzad atzmi can't exist, doesn't possess the ability of existence. And the fact that he exists is because the Eibush is being mahaber. That's all mitzad the nivra. And the question is, you say the mashal when a person is throwing a stone. The Evan mitzad atzmi doesn't have the ability to fly. But a person has a keich hazrika. One of the keiches, a person has a keich to throw a stone. There's a keich hazrika. See, the concept of throwing a stone, from the point of view of the stone, there's no necessity stronger for it to fly in the air. But legabi keich hayad gives a certain legabi keich hayad. There is a mitzias of a stone flying. And it's one of his keiches. One of his keiches is that he can throw a stone, and the fact that he throws a stone that expresses a certain keich of the person. So you can't say that the nivra mitzad himself, the Evan doesn't contain within himself the ability to exist, to fly. But legabe the keich hayad, there is a certain chshivus to this Indian of an Evan flying, and he's expressed through keich hazrika. So Shail is without the Havana. If you would have said that this Havas is from Surah Samalchus, what would be the Havana? There's a keich in the Lukus which Inyona is lahavis nivra. There's a keich which is expressed. His Indian is to create, and this keich is expressed in the fact that the Eibush created the world, expresses the Eibush's keich lahavis. Then, even though the nivra mitzad atzmi is ayin v'efes hamuchlet, and the nivra inside himself, not as the fact that the Eibush could create. A table in itself can't exist or has no existence. But the table, but the gabi, the Eibush's keich, what brings out the fact that it's able to create? What expresses the ability of the Eibush to create? The fact that he creates a world. So the world has an esinas makim mitzad the keich. You can't say the gabi a keich, the elamis have not fizas makim at all. Inyona is a keich lavis, and his in is expressed through creating this world. That's what the Rebbe is coming to be showing. When you understand that this how it's Shema is b'keich ha'atzmos, So Atzmos is, you can't say that Inyona of Atzmos is expressed through creating the world. If you have a Keach Prati, so the Keach, in Malchus, that is Inyona Lahavis. So this, you see, a person has a Keach Hayat. Inyona is a Keach Hazrika. So the Keach Hazrika is expressed through throwing a stone. His Inyan is expressed. So it's a certain chshivas. Mitzad the Keach, there's a certain sinas smakim to a mitzias of a stone flying, because that's what expresses this Keach. If the initial also the Havana would be that the Elam is mitzad atzmim have no sinas smakim, have no mitzias, they have no teich, they have no ability to exist inside themselves. A table itself doesn't exist, but within the framework of the Eibush they're creating, there isn't a sinas smakim to a world. The Eibush has a keach which Inyona lahavis, Inyona to create a mitzias, and this keach is expressed through his habas. Then the keach haliki gives in a sinas smakim to welt. So then it wouldn't be as chachas b'chol ikar mitziyusam. Then you say, Rebbe's going to make a dugma when you get to Neshama Chayes Aguf. What's the uftu when we say that this havos, the fact in order to create yeshma'ayin, that from onkum and sukkei chatzmas? What the Rebbe is saying before is that the emes is, it's not the pshat that the sphere of Samachos is a keach prati which Inyona lavis. The Eibishter is not defined at all. It's not mukder in any gedarim of ayin b'yesh. So if he wants to create, to give us in the song of Mitzias, he's not mukder that he has to be in a way of being mufshas from Mitzias. If he wants, he can relate. So it's atzmos. Since the Eibishter is Ein Sof, there's no definition in the way Ein Sof is. If he wants, he could be mahava Mitzias, and he could relate it and give it to chshivas. But it's not. We're not dealing with a keach prati, which Inyona labas. It's the etzem being mahava. Because the etzem is not mukder, so he can do any way he wants. He could be, since he's tachas Ein Sof. If his ratzon is to be mahava mitzias and to give chshivas to the mitzias of Welt, so there's a mitzias, so vert Welt mitzias, because that's the kavanah, not because he's in a darga where Welt has a tfisas makim. Versteht the meaning? It's a big difference. It's one way is you say, if a person throwing a stone, the kayach, which is the source of the zrikas of heaven, that kayach gives chshivas to the stone. The gabi that kayach, a stone flying is a mitzias because it expresses it. But if you're going to say we're dealing with that in which is Ein Sof. What's causing the stone to fly, what's invested in throwing the stone, is the Eibush which is Ein Sof. So if he's Ein Sof, how is he creating a world? He's not defined. You see, if he's Ein Sof, so he's not mugder that the world has to be or not. So the Eibush is not mugder in the Gdarim of Ayin V'yesh. If he's not mugder, so if his kavanah is should be a vel, but verna vel. But in that eifin, but even mitzad his havos, there's no chshivas to the mitzvah of vel. The Indian is his kavanah. If the kayach is a kayach prati in Inyona lahavis, so legabi the kayach there's a chshivas to the mitzvah of vel by definition, not mitzad the kayach. If you have a kayach which in Inyona to create, so creation has value legabi a creator because creation expresses the creator. So vel katan is nasmakim mitzad it has its own value. It's a creation which expresses the fact that the maker is able to create. Well, when you say that the one that's creating the nivra is tachas Ein Sof, the bada there is Ein Sof ken stein vir vil. He's not Ein Sof that he has to be beyond. There's no definition of how the Ein Sof has to be. So if he wants, he could give this in a smug of Tamitzis. So who's the one giving this in a smug of Tamitzis? Atzmos is just tachas Ein Sof. So you can't say the Gabi Atzmos that he's Erzazah Sart Zach, which the world expresses him. Nothing expresses him. He's beyond everything. He's just not limited that he has to be dafka beyond. So if he wants, can stay in Azayif. Then the whole chshivas of Welt is that that's the kavanah. That's the ratzon ha'etzem. In a certain way, the Nekudah of Baal Shem Tov, that everything's about never verstehen. One of the expressions of this word, you say that what's the Nekudah of the Pashtus, you see the way we the Pashtus is. Let's say there's maybe she created, let's say, a paper that the tchun of the paper is that it's light, and if there's a wind, the paper is going to fly. And then the Eibush created a wind which blows. Let's say there's the Eibush, Oliver Tzena, there should be a wind now in this room. And Oliver Tzena, there should be a paper on this table. There's a paper here and there should be a wind. Now, in order for the paper to fly, you have to have a separate ratzon. The Eibush wanted to create, he wants there should be a wind here, and he wants a wind which tiva is to blow light things away. He wanted to create, and the ratzon is there should be a paper here which is light, which the teva the paper is, and it should fly. And Lepoil, he wants that in this room there should be a paper and a wind. Is there going to be hashgacha pratis that this paper should fly now mitzad this wind? Or once you have a ratzon there should be a wind, and you have a ratzon there should be a paper, So the automatic result is going to be that the paper is going to fly. So HaChassidus says that there's nothing automatic. There's nothing, since we have Aleph, since we have Beis, Muz Zayin HaGimel. Shtas is that. So that's with the Aleph. It's not, the Eibusher wanted there should be a wind. He wanted there should be leaves. Now, Vashem says the fact that the leaf is draining sich inside the wind is HaChassidus. L'chor, it's a tetzah hechrechis of the Metzias, where the Eibusher created it. He created wind which blows, and he wants wind to blow. That was Tali birds. But if the Eibusher wouldn't have wanted, it wouldn't have been a wind. If he wouldn't have wanted leaves, and he wouldn't have wanted leaves should be light, they wouldn't have. But the Poyel, he wants wind, and he wants the leaves. Now, yes, the fact that the leaves are being misgalgal is HaChassidus. Why is HaChassidus? So the vart is, if, and it's a little bit connected to this vart, but what we're saying is, on one hand, you say the Eibusher created the world. So if you say the Eibusher limited himself, the fact that he wanted that wind should be something which blows. So now, he limited himself in a form that there's a chayis that's mechayed the ruach should blow. And then there's going to be, say, tetzais. Even things that he doesn't want. If the Eibusher limited, was mitzamtzim himself, and he was mamshech chayis in a ruach that blows. Now, this ruach is going to blow, and things are going to fly. The Eibusher is kabiyach limited. Once you're mahava ruach, and you wanted the ruach to fly, and you're mahava leaves, that you wanted leaves to be light things that they should be affected by the ruach. So even if you don't want the leaves to fly, but if you want leaves in this room, and you want a wind here, the leaves are going to have to fly. But Eben is that there's no the koyach haliki, which is mahava velt, is not a dargan alakus, which is mitzumtzum according to the tzir of teva, according to the tzir of elements. It's the same. The Eibusher is ein sof. Because he's ein sof, he's not limited that he has to be in a way of beyond definition. He can be mislabish, he can be mitzamtzum. But what's the whole shivus of velt? His ratzon, his kavanah. It's not that within the dark of creating elemis, he's in the mode. He has a shaykhis to the mitzvah. If he's in the mode of velt, he was mugbal according to the tzir of velt. So now there's certain gdarim which come mitzad the kelim, mitzad the mitzvah of elam. But we're dealing with the same etzem, which is ein sof, which the gabi hin there's no nisin asmagim to anything. But all the birds to be in the tzir of giving it asmagim to velt. So the whole chshivas of velt is because that's his ratzon. You take away his ratzon, it doesn't exist at all. So if it's not kfiyah kavanah, there's no chshivas to anything in velt outside of the fact that it's all the beratzon ha'atzmus to give chshivas to velt. You take away the ratzon, there's nothing that exists. That understand how it works with the. On one hand, we're saying mitzad etzim, there's like giving this in the sakna velt and being mahava, but not because he's in a mode. His hagdara is that he gives him this in the sakna velt because he's tachas ein sof, so he's not defined in any way. You heard the meaning. Maybe we'll clarify a little bit. But the Rebbe, I remember seeing this in the Sikha, but Rebbe was to say it, that the Rebbe said once that you have the same Nikud in many different ways, that you have there's a mitzvah Shabbos to eat basar shamin, good to fish, good to flesh. Steht schon auch basar shamin, yain, mevusim, good wine. So you have Shabbos is Meir, it's a higher dargan elukus on Shabbos is Meir. Lisan galavai, it's Meir, it's a hechra dargan elukus. And a person, a yida tzaddik, which has a shaykhis to ruchnis in Inyona, you could have a Meir hechra giluim Shabbos. So a regular, there says a yida tzaddik that he has a chush in the gidei elukus is going, which is Meir Shabbos. He has no interest cloud to eat flesh. Basar sham is b'chal not it's not you sit lisan galavai. But since Ratzna Alin is to have Hanoah from flesh, and a hotke has no mitzias from himself, but Mele, since that's the din of that's the Ratzna Alin, so Hotter Hanoah from flesh. So you have someone that has Hanoah from meat because he's a grub azak, he has a grub heart, and his heart enjoys a fat piece of meat. You have someone that inside his heart, inside his tchunis, inside his teva, so to speak, he would have no interest in this thing at all. How is his heart enjoying? He has no mitzias. His whole mitzias is whatever the Eibusher wants. If that's what the Eibusher wants, he's there. But in such a case, if someone enjoys meat because his heart is as a feta hearts, that's his agdara. So then there's going to be let's say results. I don't know which results are going to come, but there'll be different results. Someone that we have not seen such a dark, but someone that his whole mitzias is programmed according to Ratzonality. He's going to enjoy the meat, but he's not enjoying the meat because he's in a tzir of flesh. Because that's Ratzonality. Ratzonality is to have taken enough from Basar Shami. The point is going to have enough from Basar Shami. but not because he's in the darga of Basar Shem. Because there's nothing else besides for rationality. That's the Rebbe saying over here. In the Pashas you'll learn there's the Eibush the way is Ein Sof, higher than Eilumis, and then Sfir Samachos, Elokus, the Elokus is Mitzantzim himself, the Mahava Avelt. And the Darga, the Elokus was Mitzantzim himself, to be a Makal Hava Sa'ilam. In that Darga, Velt is a Mitzias. So they say, Memalik Alaman, the Eibush lowers himself, and Mitzad, the lower Darga gives in a Sinasakam Tevel. So of them, the Rebbe is saying, what the Rebbe said before is Havas comes from Malchus, the way it's Miyuchad with Yisrael, which means that this Havas Habriya stems from Atzma Seir Sof. Which Atzma Seir Sof is Ein Sof. It's not a Psadarga, which is Mitzumtzum Lefi Mitzias Eilumis. Now, but then, because he's Ein Sof and he's not Mugdar and Ein Yeshnei, so he's not limited that he has to be higher. And Ebervil is Ech Da'avel. But then, there is no Mitzias to Vel. The whole Mitzias is his Ratzon. Versteht the meaning? And see, when you get Hashgacha Pratis, like the Gemara says a lot of times, if you have a certain din, if you have Marshal halachis that are a chiddush, so you say in the chabay chiddush. Be'etzem, the whole thing is a pellet. Shouldn't have been. The din is only this way because that's the azet tevish gezakt. In the chabay, you can't build on it more. In the chabay chiddush. So here, the fact that there's velt as a mitzvah, it's not because we're in a darga, we're legabe that darga velt as a mitzvah. There's only ein sof. And Ein Sof has no definition at all. If he wants to be a Velt, it's a Velt. So in such a Eifin, I'm saying one of the Tetzais is that there cannot be any Prat in the Sabbath that is not Mitzad Kavanah. That's not fair to us. Because there is no Mitzias outside of the Kavanah. It's not the Pshat that there's a system of a world and the Eibishter lowered himself down to relate to this world. If you lowered himself down, then there's certain, side effects that come inside the world that he lowered himself down to. There's no Lord himself. There's the Eibishter himself. And his kavanah is to be in a tzir of Havel. So there's nothing besides the kavanah. There's no shivas to the tzir of Elumis. There's no Inyan of his havas in Elumis. The Inyan is, the Eibishter is not limited and not defined in any form. So if he wants, it can be in any form. So there's no mitzias outside of the Ratz. Instead of being matik shavir. I heard the meaning of Islam.
What's the Shiur? What's the Shkar practice or?
No, I'm saying the concept that there cannot be any tnua involved, not kfir ratzon, is connected to this word. If you say that his havas was in a way that the keich elikush mahavavelt lowered himself down to give in a sinas makim to a velt, so the world is a certain function, the way it functions, and if something's light and there's a wind, there's going to be an automatic result. In the world, there's a gather of a hechrich, a teitzah, which comes out from but if the whole thing is the Eibish's kavanah, there is no mitzvah. There is no shivas tavel. There's no shivas teva. There's the only reality is an Eibish which is Ein Sof, which is not limited in any way. And his kavanah is to be in this way. So if it's not connected to the kavanah, it doesn't exist. There's no mitzvahs of teva outside of the fact that kach oliver saying. There's only his ratzon. You say it's hard for us to be messiah. So then you're saying that there's no shivas to teva. We're not saying that. The Atzma Ein Sof is not limited, and he wants to be dafkin atzir that there is a chshivas of teva. But because Ein Sof is not limited in any form. But if it's not behesim of his kavanah, then it doesn't exist meikar. Say somebody's enjoying the meat not because he has a graba heart, but because he has no tzir and he doesn't even have a tzir ruchni. The way the Eibishter wants, that's the way he is. So in such a one simple thing is going to be is if someone is eating flesh because he has a graba heart, that's a stira to be ma'ayin, that he won't be able to eat flesh and then daven the kavanah. Once mashing is someone that his whole mitzvah is program according to Shloime, so he can be shas eating meat and chveisen hano gashmis can be shas ma'aser being the deepest vekas in the lukus, because if that's what the Eibishter wants, that's his mitzvah is his program according to rationality. It's not a stira. So you can have there's teva, but b'yachadim said there's no prat in teva that's not kfir kavanah. Yeah, it's not just a pashut, but that's what the Rebbe is saying. I'm saying the Rebbe is not bringing this out. The Rebbe is bringing this point of view. It says, that means that a darg in a lokus, which becomes a mocker to his havos, is teifsim machim legava. Legabi sfiras hamalchus velt has a mitzias. What's malchus? Let's say the ability to create, and the world is expressive. The creation expresses the fact that the Eibush is able to create. So then, then you can't say that the world is called kulev mitzad elukus, because there's a certain chshivas to velt. By definition, creation expresses the fact that there's a creator. So this is wrong with the velt. And then it would be al derech v'dugmas ma sheneshama mechayis aguf. Shegam bli achayis shemaneshama yesh lo mitzias. We'll see the pshat. I'm saying with Pashas, this dugma is a little bit far. They were saying al derech, like the neshama mechayis aguf, that the neshama only gives the guf life. It doesn't give but even without life, the guf is a mitzias. We'll see the Chorah there is different. There, the guf existed before. The neshama only gives it life. Here, we're not saying that this havos would, if the havos being tzveres hamalchus, then the guf of the nivraim would come mitzad atzmam. The Rebbe is saying the concept of a nivra would have HaChassidus. If there was an inyan elokus, if this havos stems from inyan elokus, which Inyona lahavis, let's say you have a person has a kayach hazrika. Legabi kayach hazrika, an Evan flying has a tefisas magim, and he didn't create it. That's by definition. If in Inyona lizrek, so his kayach is going to be expressed by an Evan flying. So an Evan flying, hot on earth, mitzad zrika seven. So there's a mitzad, if in yours in elokus which Inyona lahavis, a velt is has a tefisas magim, mitzad that target. So Makivan says havos im yatzim tzedin sof baruch hu. This havos stamms from the etzem, which the gabi the etzem is not trying to say that a velt has a tefisas magim. He's ain't sof. Hare ain't shum nisin as magim chol inyanim. There's no chshivus to any inyan of a velt. Kol ikar mitzias. So what's their home mitzias? That Ein Sof wants them. That the Ein Sof is mahavid them. So the Rebbe is saying the Pirushim. So the beard in Pshat, in Said, is mechazik the beard in Remes. And B'meila, like, it comes out of, I just want to bring at this point. What's the beard of Remes? The beard of Remes is the person wakes up in the morning, he should see in him waking up Yeshmai. So the Rebbe says, who could be margish that? Someone that his pshit is, that the fact that there's a mitzvah is a pelabay. Be'etzem what gedarb zayin, there shouldn't have been a mitzvah. The fact that it exists is a pella. So when he sees when the mitzvah is the ganze Teig gives that to mitzvah. The minute he sees any remnants of weakness, so he goes back right away to that be'etzem is her. So that azay, you see, even though the mitzvah, the velt mitzvah atzma is an ayin be'efes, but mitzad the elikus, mitzad the makar mahava, you say it has an asin asmakim. Here we're saying avemele if part of the Eibush created a world, when we're living in the world that the Eibush created, so mitzad, if you understand the mitzad darga of malchus, velt hotet tefisas asmakim. So mitzad that darga velt doesn't mitzvah has some type of shivus. Mashink when you come to that kara that it has an asin in itself, but the gabi etzem there's no asin asmakim klal tevel. So even now that the world is created, it's not the pshat that mitzad the even mitzad the eshavos it has no nisin asmakim. Even mitzad the eshavos of velt hotas ishkinot. The ganze zach is kachal overtain. See, as I mentioned before, you have a din which the etzem doesn't make sense. This din, the whole din is only as a special chiddush. So then ein l'chavei l'chiddush. It's exer sakasu. So when you have that card that this havas stems from atzim seidin sof, which the gabi etzem there's no nisin asmakim of any mitzias. There's no inyan that has a chshivus legabihim. So the mitzias of velt is not a stira to that car of the ayin ve'evas hamuchlut. It's not considered to that. So it's asking how could a person feel when he wakes up that it's a savas hashmayim. The Pile is living in a world that's a mitzias. But if the car is that this whole mitzias is well that Eibush because that's the kavanas essence there should be a world, then it's not a stira to have the takeif hargash in the ayin. I was saying before when you get to if you're eating meat because in the Shulchan Aruch, your home is program based on Shulchan Aruch, that gishmak and flesh is not a stira to the shas ma'aseh being double in a inyan ruchni. Yeah. B'meila bo lakar zaz yesh yidin levadi. Shekol b'meila there is the first beer, the beer of Pshat. B'meila bo lakar sa'achdas b'emesh yidin levadi. He comes to lakar that there is no mitzvahs outside of the Eibush. Shekol elam is in ayin b'efes mamash l'gavak kadosh baruch hu. Inyan Christ b'shem klal. Afilu b'shem eid shaloshim tofel. Given shekain hayinirga shasi b'pshitus shechayis psari ein shum mitzias klal gam le mitzias b'derech tafel the herzachem b'pshitus if ein ed malvade the whole mitzias eilumis is the ratzna etzem but even mitzad the mahave there's no mitzias to the vel so nirga shasi b'pshitus that stam living is not a mitzias at all mitzias hirakas kashas belikus what existence is elikus that's existence ukenal vi HaChassidus b'chalik HaChassidus medan. Once you understand that the etzem there's no nisin aslang with any mitzias outside of the etzem, so the pashat etzem should become tzivah hakadosh baruch hu yef shel ha'arif afilu leke tafel shum tam betachlis acher. V'chol kiyum tzarich li is mitzad ratzon avera. Kanal v'vir HaChassidus v'chelik hadrush u'medan. Mat gelernt, they learned the harder. I don't know which number it is by you. But it's gelernt a bissel, it's 106, the one with Sheikh Adamona. Which number is it? Huh? 107. But it's gelernt, should we go through it? There's 107 is the Afsha Kodesh HaChiddush Ba. That's 111. That's 111. That's one. Nachamal.
111 and 112.
So we start with 111. Okay, 111. I said about that. The Afsha Kodesh HaChiddush Ba Ma'asim Seder Sof is Ba Muchrachas Ma'Kodesh Ilmas M'Chodashim Yishma'in. Calls it Achash HaKodesh B'Chiddush Yishma'in and Mevi HaKodesh HaChiddush Ba Ma'asim Seder Sof. In Yakodesh Zu Lerek Shem Chazekes HaKodesh B'Chiddush Yishma'in Shem Sipa B'Gam Emek. I mentioned before. HaKodesh B'Chiddush Yishma'in Shem Sadatzme He Shein Shunus in the Smokim Le'Yesh Shem Sadatzme. Means Sadatzme has no Metzias. אבל אין זה מכריח עדיין שאלה ניסים הסמוקים גם מצד בחינת סעיר המהווה. The question is, מצד המוקר does it have מציאס? ויש מצד עצמי אז לא מציאס, מצד המוקר hat es ja מציאס. אבל הידיעה הקודש, החידוש בו מעצת סעיר לסוף של המיילה מאלומס, ובעוד הידיעה הקודש גם מצד בחינת סעיר המהווה אין לי שום תפיס הסמוקים. ולכן גם לאחרי שאולה ברציני להווה יזכולו, ישהב זכור רגע ישחט זמור. That's the question. The question is, even לאחרי אלוקוס כביכול in התנועה ושהבס. The whole metzias is that the Ratzna Eldin is Lahabis. Good. Now the Rebbe adds here, Re'ei Darch Mitzvah is a Peltic Gezach. But Mashmupur Sheikh the Mona Perik Vav, in the Rebbe touches there, that what's the Pshat, the Pasuk V'edai Teim Sheis Al-Vecha, Ki Hashem Hu Elikim, V'Shamayim Ma'u L'Aretz Mitachas, Ein Eid. So the Rebbe says, what's the Lashon Ein Eid? That Eid is Lashon Tafel. And steht in the Gemara, Ki Yehuda, V'Eid L'Kra. The Gemara uses the Lashon V'Eid. So V'Eid is Tafel. Zamra is Alter says that the guf is called Eid l'gabe the neshama. Hal Hashem mechaya Zamra l'kai be'eidi. Eid is the guf because the guf is tafel to the neshama. The main thing is the neshama, person's life, seichel, midas, his keiches. The guf is a vehicle to the neshama, so it's a tafel to the neshama. So what's the pshat in Eid? Azeh in can track that the world is a tafel to lukus. Avada the ikar is the chayis l'ki, and the fact that the Eibush is mahavev lo, and the world is just a tafel. So Avzem like the pasuk, it's not even a tafel. Ein Eid. It doesn't have any chshivas, has no, its whole mitzvah in the mitzvah. What's the parsha to appear in Tanya, in Sheikh Adamuna? Why is Taka the world not a tafel? So Alter Rebbe says in Parshas the Lashon Tanya is, the guf has a mitzvah besides for the neshama. The guf wasn't created by the neshama. It gets its chayes from the neshama. So the guf has some mitzvahs. Elamai, it's a tafel to the neshama. Mashink in the guf, Mashink in Welt, Alter Rebbe says that they were in a shave mitzvah. So they're not a tafel is something that exists, but something else is gives it a whole different, gives it chayis. But here, the whole Ishavas came inside the Lukas. So the world is not even it. That's as they state in Parshas and Tanya, if you Perek Vav. But the Samad Tzedek says something else. It says, Der P'Sesecha steht, Shema Shemavur, B'Shar Yichud B'Amunah Perek Vav, in Eid. So that She'en Afilu Dover Tafel, that the world is not even, doesn't have a chshivus of a Dover Tafel. V'Leika Guf Shu Tafel L'Neshama. So the Samad Tzedek says there that that's Dafke L'Gabi P'chinas HaSev. Paul the Gezach. In Parshas Tanya, weiß ich jetzt nicht das. In Tanya, the reason why the guf is not a tafel is because his ishavas is yeshma'ayim. The Alter Rebbe is not speaking about Sevid in Parshas until the end of till Perek Vav. The Alter Rebbe is speaking when you get to the mitzad the etz of his havas. The Alter Rebbe is not going into because his havas is mitzad Ein Sof, which is higher than being a mocker to mitzvahs. Since this havas is yeshma'ayim mamish, and mitzad yeshma'ayim, so it's not like the chayes and shamam yaguf. And so Tzedek says there that the fact that Alter Rebbe says that the world is not even a tafel is dafka the gabi seviv. Shlechein u'Mesa'elam shkoy yidiyasam rak b'chinas amali v'achshiv ma'isig k'neshama l'guf. So Tzedek says there that the fact that the Eibush created the world and the world is yesh ma'ayin does kind of go echet wissen. That's that's the basic fact that the world mitzadatmi has no mitzias and its whole mitzias is mitzad l'guf. But that it's not doesn't even have the chshivus of a guf does kind of go nish verstehen. Mitzad the Sherish gay is only is Mushish and Ma'al Kalam. He has no shaykhs. The Elokus is higher than Elomis. A gay has no shaykhs with this darga. So Vasfar darga Vaser only the way Elokus is already a Makal Mitzis. So Gabi a guy he's always going to view he can have a car in Elokus, but he's always going to view the world as a tafel to Elokus that has no Mitzis at all. That cannot be Munach Vayday. As he said, the Rebbe Shaila is l'chura harigam l'shitasam. Behechrich sheyodu shakadosh baruch hu beiris an nivraim v'lerek mechayes an bava. So how can you be medamet on the neshama guf? The Shah is also on the Alter Rebbe. On the Tzemach Tzedek. The Alter Rebbe is, how could the Tzemach Tzedek say that the fact that the Welt doesn't even have the cheshivas of Tafel is mitzat tzeiv. Even not mitzat tzeiv. Even mitzat mamali, this house is derech yesh ma'ayin. The Tzemach Tzedek is married. The Rebbe could also understand that the world doesn't have a yesh ma'ayin. If it's yesh ma'ayin, so then it's not like the neshama and guf. The guf existed. The neshama doesn't create the body. The neshama just gives chayis. So how could it be medam and neshama and the savas ha'elam to the yachas of the neshama and guf? So the Rebbe sagt das. Beer b'zeh. Na beer. It's mekivan. The Rebbe says it's a different touch. What the Rebbe is saying here is we're not dealing with. The guf is not created by the neshama. We're not dealing with that. The guf only gets chayis. When the Tzemach Tzedek means that the goyim, even though they know that the savas elam is yesh ma'ayin, they would be medamit to the yachas and the neshama and guf, is not legabe his havos, it's legabe chayis. The world gets his havos from the Eibishter and the neshama gets chayis. When the neshama is machaya the guf, in the aspect of chayis, so you could the guf mitzad atzmi has no life. Guf mitzad atzmi is a davar meis. It gets chayis from the neshama. But why is the neshama machaya this guf dafke? Why is the neshama machaya the guf? Because there's a certain cheshivas to the guf. The neshama is not machaya stone. It's machaya dafka guf adam. Even though the guf, the fact that the neshama is giving it chayis is because there's a certain cheshivas to the mitzvah. The guf is tougher to the neshama. The cheshivas says that the neshama can express itself through the body. It's not about the guf, but because the neshama is in, it can be expressed through the guf. But so Avdem Zat Tzemach Tzedek with if the akara in Holocaust is that this havas is mitzat b'chinas mamali. Mamali is dark because it's just mitzam to himself. The given is in a smuggle to the mitzvah savel. So there, the heritage of a guy is the fact that the Eibush created the world and the way the world is created, because this is the right world to express the Eibush's keichais havas. And a guy cannot verstehen anders. But dogma is like Shas, the neshama is mechaya the guf. So the guf doesn't have chayis in Sadat. But why is the neshama dafke mechaya the guf and not a different guf, a guf of a balchai? Because dafke guf of Adam expresses the muhusa of the neshama. So al derech zeh, if this house would be that mitzad malik kol then the pshat is that the fact that the Eibush created the world and the way the whole Ishtalshlus is created, because this world, the way it was created, that expresses him. So then it would have the cheshivas of tafel. The world mitzad atzmi has no mitzvahs, but as this is as expressing the Eibishter, this is the right world to express the Eibishter's keichais havas. In order to have that kara that the world has no cheshivas at all, not even a cheshivas of tafel. The world doesn't express. The fact that Eibishter decided to create this world is because kach Oliver saying, not because the world, Azastar Welt, could express his ability to create. That akar is dafki mitzat sevi kolam. That's the Rebbe touches over here. So he says, "Ba'bir v'kim shel amal yisem makom le'elamis hari achli shenivro elamis bitul elamis le'er zeh av shkol mitzusim mimenu le'er kayusum hu dugmas bitul aguf lanish." But that in Tzarachi in the lashon of Tzemach Tzedek, Tzedek's lashon is that if that a goy which is whole yidei is amali, his lashon is something that is machshiv the yachas of the Eibush of the world as a neshama and a guf. And the Pashas Mashma is lashon is mashma that the same way the guf is not created by the neshama, he only gets chayis. Al derech za'elam is are not created, something like that. L'chorah is nicht das. From Taichen, the Remeint is saying that he's not medamet to neshama and guf legabe them that the guf is not created by the neshama. He's being medamet in what's the perspective of the neshama when he's being mechayis a guf. But it's not the mashmas haloshin there for the sach.
Why did it say that the akar comes after from Asma from saving the same akar?
The Ramsesach is not going. Yeah, the Nekuda is that the Ishabos. The Ramsesach is not going into the whole beer, but the Alter Rebbe says there in the end of Perek Vav that the Ishabos comes from Dvaravai, which is a Mali, and Dvaravai is miyuched with Seviv. The Alter Rebbe says in the end of Perek Vav. So the Rebbe here is explaining that the Alter Rebbe doesn't explain why the way the Alter Rebbe is, but the reason why Mali is miyuched with Seviv is because Dugmas Erakol Vashem is different. Not the way the Rebbe is saying here. But the concept is, and so Tzedek says, that once we understand that this Havas and the Elokus which is involved in this Havas is Ein Sof, which is higher than Elomis, which is Seviv, so in Meile, there's no Chshivas developed. Here they were speaking of a different beer, the beer of Nazis. Saying, why is the Rebbe can't use that beer?
It's always tied on elements, and any direct tied on elements.
Atzmus. Okay, the truth is that if you go into Pratim, every darga besides for Atzmus, there is some sort of his Malchum Teilemus. That's the truth. But here, the Rebbe wants to explain there in the Rebbe Tzesecha, now there is in Tanya, the Pashas, the Kavana is, the Havana is that Malchus is Atzmus Kimi Mahavi Yeshmai. For side reasons, Malchus is Miyuchad with Seviv. Because since Mamal is Nimshach from Seviv, and B'meila it's like Al Derech Ela Kol B'Hashem, it's different B'Yurim, not that his Havas, Mitzad Atzmei, demands Seviv Kolam. So Mitzad Havana, it's Kaviyachol Tu Inyona. This Havas Elon comes from Chinas Malchus, and his Havas and his Atzmei is not connected to Ein Sev. And then Malchus, for other reasons, is Miyuchad with Ein Sev. B'meila Kuntres of the world as well. Here the Rebbe wants to teach that Malchus cannot function without Atzmei Sev itself. So there's no aspect in Hishtashlos which is michutz to the Etzem. That's the Rebbe wants to catch here. So the Pshat is his Havas comes from Malchus, and then his Batul Tanei B'Shter, which is outside of him. His Havas is Mitzad Etzem. So if his Havas is Mitzad, the Makar HaMahavas Ha'elam is a darga where there's nothing else besides for his Ratzon. So then there's no aspect in Mitzias which is outside of the Kavanah Yen of Atzmas. The way the Birn of Tzachah is, Etzem in Havas Havas you don't need to have Atzmas inside. But there's for some reason, not mitzad in Havas Havas, the Mamale is Batul and Seviv. Then comes out there's an aspect which is not Kavanah Etzem, which is not the Etzem, which is not Insaf. Here the Rebbe wants to bring out Malchus in Inyona is Lahavas. His Mitzias cannot exist without Etzem. That means the premise of Malchus is Atzmas Insaf. And that's a whole different, it's a whole different adgasha. So the Yamut Kuntres that there's Ein Mavadi, there's no other mitzvahs. The only mitzvahs is Ratzon Etzem. Learn us if you say. Chinas Hayisayid, Chinas Hayichido, Liyosa Atzmis, Ein Shel is a Nefesh of Neshama Chayim. It's something which is a darga. So every darga has a tzir and his Shel another tzir. The etzem is not shayl anything. It's an adarabah. He ha etzem shekol madregas hapratis. The etzem doesn't negate the tzir haprat. Fakert, he's the mahus. He's the inner core of every tzir prati. It says shezeu echad achilukim sheben gilui laetzem. Gilui hu inyan prati. A certain maila, a certain function, and since it's an inyan prati, kol ha'inyanim she'enam gilui, anything which is any inyan which is not his expression. He does not err. Enam hu. For the Yesa Gili mispashet to Shel. It's interesting. What's the? They're use Yiddish in this verse in Yiddish because we dafür Besaris bringing as a. So Hushel, yeah. So every Gili is an Indian prati, and whatever is not that Gili, and Inyona is that his Indian should be bezgalus, his Indian should be bezpashtus. So he negates. It's also Chen Zainzach. So b'shas that Seichel is nirgash. Seichel has his Inyan. Inyona is Seichel. And b'shas the Keach HaSeichel is Bezgalus. And it's nirgash. So it'll be a chlishis in other Keachas HaNefesh. Because he has his Inyan. And his Inyan is whatever is not behesim with him. So that's not going to contribute to his Ispashtas. Is it the Shelo? מה שאין כן עצם הוא העצמי של כל עניין ועניין. ולכן מהדגשת העיקר שבחסידות הוא איחוד הפרטים עם העצם. In every Indian to bring out how that the different pratim which are in something and the different different expressions of an Indian, how they all stem from the Nekudas Etzem. How they're all expressions of one Nekuda. It's one of the adgashas of Chassidus. Because mitzad the etzem, you don't negate any prat. Fakert, you bring out the pnimius and the mahus of every prat. V'gam adgasha zu tuven yoser me'achayis shechsidus nachnis b'chol dal chol ke'apshat remez drush seishu meidani. You'll see this in this adgasha of Chassidus to bring out how every prat expresses that. It's every yomtiv. When it comes to a certain yomtiv, so Chassidus brings out that this yomtiv is expresses or relates to the etzem of a yid, the pnimius of a yid. And it brings out the different mitzvahs achag are all neveh from one akudah. So every Indian prati, Chassidus is mekasher to the etzem. and that it's every Indian its way of expressing the Etzem. So that in is also mudgish in the Biur Nachsin gives a medan. Binin asfiris chilik asayid. Gam b'chinas hamachas atzam yichedes v'sfiris asayid. Achenasam ini nechet melech havekayim. Means that we're not saying that there's no malchus. We're not saying that the Eibishter is not nesin makim to his house. Sedom malchus. It means there is the lukus is nesin makim. But the shayla is, what's the pnimius of that in? A lukus nesin makim l'maylim is not a stirit to the nekudah of Ein Sof. Because since the Eibishter is not defined any mugdar bagdarim bayin v'yesh, so he doesn't have to be in a way that is higher than Eilim. So steht in Natzir, he's Natzir of Malchus, he's nesin makim to Mitzias. Why is he nesin makim to Mitzias? Not because he's limited, and that's his. Because his Ein Sof can stay as Eichet. He can also be in a tzir of nesin makim to Mitzias. We're not being sheled in Malchus. We're not saying that there is no aspect in the Lakus which gives chshivas tavel. We're saying we're giving you the right understanding in this Nekudah Malchus that it's one. It's the same Inyan as Ein Sof. Why is the same Inyan as Ein Sof? Because what's the Nekudah oblique? That the Eibishter is not defined. If he's not defined, he could also be in a form of Yachas Teilis, of Yeginis Islam Teilis. Say Ein Sof. It says Umemel Inyona Achtash Inyona Belvadi Ein Shaloi Yesh Lemitzias Eilim. Ki im shigam ha'elim es atzmim kamei shehem nimtzan b'mitziyusam umugdarim b'geder zman ha'makim miyichodim hem b'tachas ha'yichad ba'asam seir nitzah baruch hu. Nicht in Welt. It's a da Welt, and there's a world, exactly the world is functioning. And this world is one with the Eibishter himself. Wie kann man sagen, that Ein Sof, that is havas ha'elam, elam gashmi is miyuchad b'tachlis, it's one with Ein Sof. If Atmas Ein Sof is not defined, so he could be expressed in any way, he could be present in any way. And that's the Mitzias Eilumus. There's been a mitzvah chilik hadrush, gam a mitzvah sheyesh aleim tam, you come to the mitzvah shemishpatim, misachtem ve'ikrim or rosin pashal hamitam. We're not saying that there is no tam. We're saying the tam adased deretzim. B'inyan abriya chilik hadem is gam b'inyan eilim commission. This is an interesting part to there. This is gam b'inyan eilim. The Rebbe says like this. What Pashas yesh ma'ayin means the world mitzad atzmi doesn't exist. The fact that the world is an ayin ve'efes, that cannot be nirgash within the mitzias of Welt, because its mitzias contains only its mitzias, not its ayin. The ayin is where it doesn't exist. The way we experience the world, but his chachas adam v'elam shel chol beker is chachas chol etzem mitzias. There's the fact that within the regular function of life, there's an expression of Yesh Ma'ayin that brings out that the etzem is not mugbal. Even in order to as a leichten the fact that the world is ayin ve'efes, you need that the world should be ois mitzias, or even there's no limit in the emes. The emes can be expressed in any way. So even the way the world is functioning as a mitzias, and therefore the world is functioning in a way that it's a mitzias. So we cannot be margish in the Kovetz chachas hashmayim. Ava became within this mitzias the emes is reflected. So that brings out the fact that the whole Inyona is havos is the mitzad Eibishter. That's brought out in a deeper eifin in the fact that the mitzias itself expresses the multi mitzias. So between Regesh Adam Chilek Apshat, Gam Beidas Adam Achayev. And in order, the Rebbe says also, there's a Shear Shtak about for a Yid that shaykhs to Chassidus, it's not a Yid that's mufshit. He has no shaykhs to Elam Hazeh, he has no shaykhs to Aruchnis to Kiyid. Says there's no Hagbala, there's no definition of where the etzem could be expressed. So Gam in Regesh Adam, Gam Beidas Adam Achayus. A person is thanking the fact that he's alive. Woke up in the morning. Dort can sich hören the emes. Nigash kol chayusu mashal Yehudi. Means the etzem is not shel any prat. In fact, since the etzem is not shel, so it's not the pshat when you have his galasa etzem, everything else is cancelled. When you have his galasa etzem, everything else stays intact exactly the way they are, and their previous is his gal. As I was saying over here, a yid that has shaykhs HaChassidus, he's going to forget to say thank you for the fact that he's alive. He's not going to be sensitive to the fact that he's alive. Every aspect of life is going to be there. But it's going to be an eifin that the hergish should be that his whole mitzias is the fact that he's a yid. Nachasif. Here, this sif is already achana to the next thing. That not tchilas in the sefer. Here, they're starting a new Inyan that here, the Rebbe is saying that Inyan of Gilui, every Inyan has his tzir, and b'meila he's shaylo anything which is not the hesem with his tzir. Mashiach etzem is not an Inyan prati, and because the etzem is not an Inyan prati, he's an all-inclusive in Inyan. B'meila he's not shaylo anything. Fakir, everything stays in their tzir, and he's b'shas the etzem is nizgale, their mohus is nizgale. Now the Rebbe is adding that vu gitz chareis. The nekuda sa'etzem, dafka where the etzem is nimshach and Meir in the lowest darkest. Now, Tona, we're saying he doesn't have to reveal himself in a way of negating. He could also be a mitzias. He could also be mislavish in the prat, the way the prat is a mitzias. And the Rebbe is saying from Sifyat Ches to Sifyat Tes until the end of the Kuntres that dafka in the fact that the etzem is mashpia on the lowest darkest, there is expressed the etzem in the deepest way. Okay, we'll see that. So we'll be able to feel. You have some time. Let's learn in this.